I talked to eCapitol News Director Sean Ashley about what to expect as the session begins at the Capitol. Sean, the governor and Republican leaders in the House and Senate are talking about tax cuts and budget cuts.
Yes, it's going to be a very interesting budget year, it appears, with this legislative session. As we talked about last week, for example, the Board of Equalization has said that the legislature will have, at this point, nearly $171 million less with which to work. That'll be reflected in the governor's budget that will be presented on Monday. So somehow you've got to balance that, and that probably means some cuts to state agency funding. At the same time, Governor Fallin was very explicit Wednesday while speaking before the Associated Press Legislative Forum that she plans to propose some form of individual income tax cut. That idea was supported by Senate President Pro Tem Brian Bingman, as well as House Speaker Pro Tem Mike Jackson. So once again, it seems like we have Republicans on board supporting a tax cut, but it comes at that awkward time where we have less revenue, and at the same time, as you said, we're talking about cutting spending.
And certainly it was an admission that when you cut taxes, you very well may have less money, which runs counter to what we've been hearing for many years, which is as you cut taxes, you will generate more revenue.
Well, that's always an interesting discussion, and you and I have talked about this a number of times. There is that economic approach that says when you reduce taxes, you stimulate economic development and economic growth, and that you do at some point gain additional revenue. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at it from a budgeting standpoint, you have to be realistic. You know, when you lower that individual income tax rate, if you lower it by 0.25 percentage points, you're going to lose somewhere between $120 million and $130 million that you would otherwise have available to spend. So when they calculate and write their budget, they're going to have to take that into consideration.
What's the Democratic reaction to that plan?
Well, as you might expect, they were very much against it. But they point out quite rightly that you're talking about reducing revenue at the same time that we are already looking at less money to spend. And when you do that, you're talking about some rather significant cuts that agencies might have to endure. They said quite simply that they would oppose it.
It appears there will be another collision of Democrats and Republicans regarding the judiciary.
Yes, that's true. Both the Democratic leaders who spoke this past week at the Legislative Forum indicated their opposition to most of the so-called judicial reform proposals that we're hearing. On the other side, the Republicans, while not explicitly supportive of the measures, seem to indicate that they would at least like to see them debated. It's kind of interesting to point out that the Democratic leaders, Sean Burridge in the Senate and Scott Inman in the House, are attorneys, while the Republican leaders in the House and the Senate are not. It's also worth noting that while House Speaker T.W. Shannon has filed several pieces of so-called judicial reform legislation, there already are a couple of resolutions sitting in the House that were authored by Senator Clark Jolly that would do much of the same thing. If the House really wanted to, they could move very quickly on those measures, have them approved and put on the ballot for this November.
Very briefly, what are other storylines to watch?
There's going to be a lot going on at the Capitol. I think two of the big issues we will also see this year is the ongoing debate over Common Core. There are a couple of bills that would remove that from state statute and prevent the state from implementing it. I think we're also going to hear a lot of talk over bond issues, about funding repairs to the Capitol and other state buildings.
Sean Ashley, News Director from eCapitol, thank you.
You're very welcome.